Greetings from the city of brotherly love. I am Fernando Mendez, host of the Roundtable. We invite you to listen to our discussion of the themes of the day when we bring you regional, national, and international news. Señores oyentes de Uso de la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Roundtable. Les habla Fernando Mendez, aquí desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal, the city of brotherly love. Dani Romas controla el tablero. Bueno, hay noticias de todo. Pero la preocupación principal del gobierno en este momento es la inflación. Como ya sabemos, están aprobando una legislación que va a traer a los gastos de Estados Unidos más de 1 trillón, 1.5 trillones de dólares. Eso es un número con muchos ceros. Y el problema es que esto va a tener consecuencias para la deuda y luego, pues, por supuesto, en cuanto a la inflación, porque no sé, porque no entiendo todos los aspectos de la economía, no sé si esto es como consecuencia de, de los números de 1.5 trillones o simplemente que ha venido con nosotros por el asunto de COVID-19. Entonces, bueno, los titulares en el Philadelphia Inquirer. Philly cheesesteaks, Wawa hoagies, and soft pretzels are getting more expensive. Blame inflation. Así que usted tiene que pagar más. Se ha vuelto cara la vida de todos modos. Ya sabemos que, por COVID vimos los efectos en cuanto a la gente perdiendo sus empleos. Vamos a mencionar este asunto un poco más tarde, hablando sobre por qué no hay, la gente no siente prisa en regresar a sus empleos. Y de hecho, están llamando eso la gran renuncia, que hay mucha gente que no quiere volver a trabajar, especialmente no quieren volver a trabajar en los puestos de antes, en donde, pues, por varias razones, no habían recibido buenos sueldos. En la industria de servicios, por ejemplo, la gente depende mucho de propinas. A mí me sorprendió el número en cuanto a salario básico para un mesero o mesera. Menos de $3, entre 2 y 2.50, algo así, como mínimo. Y pues no les pagan más, precisamente por el asunto de las propinas. Muchos de estos meseros, meseras, gente en la industria de servicios dependen de las propinas. Y bueno, si hay escasez de dinero, porque la gente no tiene dinero, porque han perdido sus empleos, que los han llamado para trabajar medio tiempo en vez de tiempo completo, si hay una necesidad de pagar más por seguro de salud, que eso está ocurriendo también. Esa es una de las principales preocupaciones para la gente en este momento. ¿Es posible lidiar con la pérdida de salario, con la pérdida de salario o completamente o parcialmente? Lo que es más difícil es esto del seguro de salud. Obamacare no sirve completamente las necesidades del pueblo. Entonces, alguna gente se ha visto ayudada, pero como ya sabemos, es la clase media que se encuentra precisamente está en el medio. La clase alta no tiene que preocuparse. Los ricos no se preocupan, los pobres pues tienen ayuda del gobierno, ayuda de non-profits y otras agencias, pero la gente en el medio que ganan demasiado y no pueden registrarse, inscribirse con Obamacare, y les cuesta demasiado el dinero el precio del seguro de salud. Así que esta es la historia de siempre. Los ricos más ricos y los pobres, pues más pobres, porque eso sí no se puede negar, que es una pobreza tremenda. Entonces, Philadelphia Inquirer says, skyrocketing inflation is impacting some of the region's favorite foods, pretzels and hoagies. Those fresh pretzels, the soft ones that cost 70 cents last summer, 75 cents, you would need more than $1 now to buy one of those. And that's just a simple example. And I recently went to a football game at the stadium here in Philadelphia. And let me tell you, it's expensive to buy, even though we think of it as junk food, pizzas, hot dogs, hoagies, it's more expensive even at the stadium. And it's already expensive out in the street. So cheesesteaks, for instance, the real ones that went for almost $10, will now cost you $12 and maybe $15. Now, that's not a small increase for people who depend on this kind of food, people who enjoy pretzels and hot dogs and hoagies. The shorties at Wawa, for instance, the McDonald's of hoagies, have risen about 60 cents and now cost $5, just about what you would pay for a Big Mac. And that's from Wawa, which had taken pride in having less expensive sandwiches. And your Thanksgiving turkey, ni hablar. El pavo para el Día de Acción de Gracias va a estar carísimo. Y todo lo que va con el pavo, todo lo que acompaña al pavo, va a estar mucho más caro en este año. Así que bueno, prepárense porque ahí vamos a llegar a eso. Here's a quote from somebody interviewed by the Inquirer. "I am a wreck because of inflation," said John Bucci, owner of the award-winning John's Roast Pork on Cider Avenue in South Philly, after raising his base sandwich from $12 to $12 from $9.75. He says, "I'm already having a nervous breakdown." And that's what's the tremendous impact that people who own businesses are going to feel. They have to feed the people trying to keep the prices reasonable, but on the other hand, the raw materials, the ham, the cheese, bread they buy, has become more expensive. I recently interviewed Matt Pagano, who owns a shop here, a restaurant here in Philly, in Center City, and they feel the pain because, first of all, they suffer because of the closing of offices. People didn't consume as much food. In fact, there were days in which no sandwiches, no food was sold during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. And so anyway, so we'll come back to that topic because what is important is why can't we bring this pandemic to an end? And we know why. So anyway, from roast pork to hoagies to pretzels, everything will be paying more. So prepare yourselves. And I'm sure that right now, as we speak, there are restaurants thinking of closing because they cannot, literally, they cannot afford to stay open. We saw a segment more scary, even more frightening in terms of the marketplace of empty shelves in a store that provides, that sells toys. And as we approach Christmas, that is going to be a threat because children will not have all the things that they would like to have. So um, we all talked this week with Leticia Ron Nixon about the pressures that stores feel. So that'll be one of the programs coming to you this week. We're going to speak about um, the empty warehouses and why they are empty, and the numerous ships that cannot unload their cargo. And they're in Los Angeles, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Baltimore, there are ships waiting to unload the cargo. And now we saw a segment on 60 Minutes as to some of the reasons for that. And it's not just one simple link in the chain. The whole chain to deliver the goods to the stores and to the public, the whole chain is suffering from beginning to the end. So we're going to take a brief pause here en Úsala Radio. Les habla Fernando Mendez desde la Mesa Redonda. Dani Ramos controla la máquina digital. Regresamos en un momento.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes. You can do it here. But I get it, you're busy, and busy people can't have prediabetes. I read that wrong. They can, okay? Just go to the site.
Señores oyentes de Usa la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Roundtable desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal. Les habla Fernando Méndez, Dani Ramos controla la máquina digital. Y en esta ciudad, the city of brotherly love, the price of goods, foods, and other stuff is going up. So we're going to feel that in the coming days. They're already predicting that it's not going to be a regular Christmas. It's going to be very difficult to find gifts, to find merchandise that we want to buy, anywhere from computers, cameras to clothing, toys. A lot of that stuff is stuck in the warehouses, in the ports where the trucks have not been able to enter. In the case of Los Angeles, for instance, with our segment, where the whole chain has broken down, and there are problems with the delivery. The ships that have brought the merchandise and they're near the ports, but they have been unable to unload because they are already overloaded. So that's one problem in the chain. Now, add this whole thing about inflation to the problems that we are facing in this country. It's a crisis of confidence. Headlines are saying that Biden is not popular. His popularity is in the 40s. He has not been able to deliver all that he wanted to do at this point. People are already feeling disappointed from both parties. Obviously, Republicans more so, because Republicans are still in a very high number, 70s. They don't believe Biden's doing his job, but they still think that some of them still think Trump is president. In fact, Trump himself apparently believes he's president. He has challenged the subpoenas, saying that he has privileges because he is the president. He has executive privileges, but I don't think so. The courts have already ruled that, say, this is from the time of Nixon, the courts ruled that when there is a higher imperative, the president must provide the information requested. In this case, Congress seems ready to demand and to send people to prison if they don't comply with subpoenas and appealing for documents and so on. One of those high-profile individuals, Mr. Steve Bannon, already famous because somehow he found a way to get a pardon from Donald Trump as he was leaving. That was very cynical in the face of it, because we knew, and Trump knew, and Bannon knew that he was very vulnerable to accusations of malfeasance and plotting to overthrow the government and so on. We have seen more recently, we have seen more and more evidence that this was no spontaneous. No, it did not just happen at the moment when that crowd gathered to listen to Donald Trump on January 6th. That Steve Bannon, in fact, and another group of people had a command center in Washington ready to organize the raid on the Capitol. So that's stuff that's already known to us, but there is, each day, there is more evidence that it did happen that way, that in fact, Mr. Trump was plotting to take over the government by force, that he cynically declared that he knew Pence was in jeopardy. Apparently he didn't care. He said that Pence was not doing his job. How could you verify a crooked election? That's more or less what Trump has been saying. So that was the reason, that's the thinking behind allowing the crowd to display a hanging place for Mr. Pence, a noose ready to put around Mr. Pence's neck. So that's each day. I don't know. You sort of stop being surprised, because now we expect anything to happen. Since when we suspected that Trump and his people had planned the attack on the Capitol, we only had some evidence from the people themselves, as they declared that they were there to listen to Mr. Trump and to follow his instructions. But now there's more and more evidence that this was really planned at high level, all the way to the president's desk, all the way to the president's office. And as we know, he watched the invasion of the Capitol and enjoyed himself. I'll talk more about this when we find out what Mr. Bannon has to say. I think he's obviously going to enter a plea of not guilty, and he may claim executive privilege for not providing the documents that Congress has requested. Which brings us to another point in this same vein. We know that Biden has not been able to accomplish all he was planning to accomplish, and yet a very high number of vaccinations have taken place. I'm not sure, but I think a spokesperson for the White House said that two-thirds of the American people were vaccinated, but that still would mean about 100 million are not vaccinated. And that's, I don't know, it's a sorry state of affairs when people are still opposed to something they know would benefit them. People know that polio was finally eradicated because there was a vaccine and other illnesses. But now the danger is by creating this mistrust in the medical establishment, which was one of the things that Trump did, the Trump administration, not just Trump. I mean, people who surrounded him. This ridiculous, absurd figures around the president, Dr. Scott Atlas, A-T-L-A-S, Atlas, like Charles Atlas. I don't know, many people remember Charles Atlas, who was sort of a model of physical power. Well, this Dr. Atlas is a ridiculous medical figure because he is the one who promoted injecting liquid into your veins, Lysol, and he convinced Trump that there were other remedies as opposed to vaccine. He also gave us, he signed that document, that letter that had to be written by the president because of the tone of the language used, because of what it said, that Donald Trump was in the best physical shape, the best of any president of the United States ever. So what do you think? I mean, that language, doesn't it echo Trump's claims about everything? I'm the smartest man who ever occupied the White House. I am a stable genius. I'm the only one who can solve the problems of the economy. Well, we know his unquenchable ego. He needed to proclaim to everybody that he was smart and strong and the best at everything, except for one thing. Remember, he's threatened his high school, his college, the Wharton School. He's threatened everybody with lawsuits if they ever release his transcripts. So this stable genius doesn't want to let us know his SAT scores. He doesn't want us to know what his average was in graduation from high school or college. Anyway, and remember that he's an expert in education. He had a college, Trump College, and I think he was forced to dismantle that clown college because it didn't provide people with an education, and the diploma was worthless. So, and on top of that is corruption. Corruption there, corruption we know. The list of his misdeeds, his lack of ethics is everywhere, from that Trump College to his claims that he was instrumental in the fight against COVID. Well, now, okay, here we are again back to COVID-19. There is documentation now that February of 2020, Mr. Trump prohibited his people, the medical people, to publish anything that put COVID in the forefront, that let people know that COVID was an imminent threat because he was afraid that would do damage to his administration. Remember, he also stopped a cruise ship from landing because there were people already infected on that vessel, and he was afraid that that number of people would add to the number of cases that we were already struggling with in this country. At that point, we were probably still under 100,000. But he was afraid that any number that added more victims related to COVID, any number would do damage to his re-election prospects. Well, he was right to some extent. I mean, I think many people voted against him because of the way he acted with respect to COVID. His minions, the people who follow him, don't care anything about COVID. They are deniers. They say there is no such a thing. They also, of course, worship at the feet of this president, this ex-president. Again, I don't know why in 2020, Donald Trump became the Republican candidate without a platform. There was nothing. He was elected just because he was Donald Trump and his people worshiped him. He had no plans. He couldn't offer any solutions to anything. He neglected the environment. He neglected one of the main things that he claims, that he fought against COVID, because the companies had already taken flight, in fact, to come up with a vaccine as quickly as possible. Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and other companies were already preparing experiments, were already vaccinating a number of people to try to determine if the vaccine was effective and so on. And there is a small amount of credit that could be given to the Trump administration for promoting the vaccines. But that was it. Remember one thing that has come up recently. Dr. Birx and other people in the Trump administration involved in this COVID fight are saying that COVID advanced because Trump refused to give it the right information, because he refused to allow the doctors to alert the public about the dangers of COVID, to promote masks, to take safety measures, washing your hands and the rest of it. The Trump administration really fought against it. Republicans somehow resisted the whole idea that COVID was here, that it was killing people, and later on the vaccines that were determined, the vaccines that were manufactured to fight against COVID, they don't want to use them. There's still a large number of people, as I said, if there are 2/3 of the population vaccinated right now, there's at least 100 million people who have not been vaccinated. The White House has some other numbers, but I believe the medical establishment has provided those figures. The thing is, COVID is still with us. And doctors feel that there is a tremendous threat that there will be another large number of people, maybe up to 100,000, killed by the Delta version of COVID-19. So it's still with us, and a country like Austria, for instance, has put people into lockdown if they are not vaccinated. And there was a report on NPR that there were like 2 million people who are not vaccinated in Austria, and they are not able to function. They cannot go to work. They cannot travel. They have very limited freedom of movement. And now I heard one of those people being interviewed and complaining about the fact that he was unable to operate freely because he's not vaccinated. His wife is vaccinated, but he's resisting the vaccine. I don't understand that. Why? In this country also, we have people determined not to be vaccinated. And that is what the problem is. We need to get rid of COVID. We need to have COVID under control in order to do all the things that we expect to do with the economy. So Mr. Biden has just has signed this 1.5 trillion investment in infrastructure. But how effective is it going to be if we're still suffering from the effects of COVID-19, where people who are, and the people who are not vaccinated are the ones responsible for spreading the virus. That is science, it's not speculation. That's a scientific fact. You are not vaccinated, you are spreading the virus. So, what is the argument? And I don't know if this government will have to take equally drastic measures, isolating people, as is being done in Austria, in order to control the virus. Well, we're going to take a brief pause here en USA la Radio. Les habla Fernando Mendez desde la ciudad del amor fraternal. Dani Ramos controla el tablero. Regresamos en un momento.
You ever had this food before, or it's like the first time you were here?
A couple times.
Yep.
Yes.
So what do you order right now? Which one?
We got the chicken tikka masala
Yeah, I got the
and the butter.
Oh, so the Indian and Pakistani food is a little bit spicy.
Yeah.
So you tolerate the spice or everything?
I like spice, but we got the mild.
Oh, okay. So it's
I can do spice.
and you?
Yeah,
like
I
spice?
mean, I can somewhat handle spice. Not too much, so that's why I got the mild.
Señores oyentes de USA la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Roundtable. Desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal, les habla Fernando Mendez. Dani Ramos controla la máquina digital. Bueno, de nuevo estamos aquí hablando sobre el tema de siempre. ¿Por qué no podemos deshacernos de esta enfermedad que ha matado tanta gente, COVID-19, COVID-19? ¿Por qué no podemos deshacernos? Porque la terquedad realmente es ignorancia de mucha gente, ¿no? Es una terquedad que sin explicación. ¿Cómo es posible que la ciencia nos ha enseñado ya que este virus es sumamente contagioso, especialmente en su forma de Delta? Otra vez tenemos hospitales que están llenos, una crisis que ya creíamos que habíamos sobrepasado, una crisis porque la gente que necesita tratamiento en hospitales, no relacionado con COVID. Esta gente no puede ir a los hospitales porque las camas están llenas, las salas de emergencia están llenas, los hospitales ya no tienen el modo de asistir a individuos que muchas veces están esperando operaciones que han planeado a largo tiempo. So, I don't know. Anyway, from Billy Penn News, so a note on what the Infrastructure Act could mean for Philadelphia. The president is expected to sign into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the 1.2 trillion. It's not 1.5, I'm sorry, correct myself. 1.2 trillion package, an estimated 18 billion, with a B, 18 billion will come to Pennsylvania. Well, probably in time, because I do recall reading a while ago, this is like 5-6 years ago, that there was a report that there were 700 bridges and roads that needed repair. I have seen some of them already taken care of. The famous bridge on South Street in Philadelphia that was falling apart. It was more than 100 years old, and it was in tremendous disrepair, crumbling, and it was replaced with a very nice structure. So that's what needs to be done. The roads in Pennsylvania in general are in need of repair. Bridges, 700 bridges 5 years ago. I don't know how many of them have been repaired. Highways need to be repaired. The city streets. Philadelphia, during the Kennedy administration, sorry to say, during the Kennedy administration, the center city felt abandoned. Many other parts of the city also suffered. But particularly center city, a showpiece, where tourists would come to the city. We spent the last year and more, 2 summers, in fact, dealing with potholes on every street, temporary closings on many streets, tremendous damage that some streets suffered on cavings. So we obviously can use the 18 billion coming to Pennsylvania. Now, let's remember that the Harrisburg legislature is in the hands of Republicans. Philadelphia is a city of democratic government. Democrats rule city council. We have a Democratic mayor. The city has not been very nice to Republicans. And now Republicans, if they have control of the purse to disburse the money coming from the government, if they have anything to say about where that money is spent, I'm afraid Pennsylvania might suffer, Philadelphia might suffer. For Philly, according to this report from Billy Penn, for Philly, the speed of expenditures could mean an increase in transit accessibility and capacity, helped to heal divided neighborhoods, a reduction in the persistent digital divide, and potentially more tourism via boosted Amtrak service. Okay, so we will benefit because Amtrak has to go through our city. Between New York and Washington, we have always suffered but being sort of a stepchild in terms of spending by Amtrak. But now with the money coming to Amtrak, to the rail system, we could see some improvement in Philadelphia also. And as the article says, a reduction in that digital divide. And I'd like to say a little more about that because during the street administration, at the very beginning of the street administration, when our friend Ken Trujillo was part of that administration, and then other Hispanics like Pedro Ramos and other leaders of the community became involved in the street administration, Nelson Diaz, that at that point, at the very beginning, Ken Trujillo was talking about the Wi-Fi that was going to be given to everybody allowed. Philadelphia will be covered with Wi-Fi, giving access to everybody. Well, here we are. When was the street government? Way back in the 90s. And here we are, probably almost 30 years later, 25 years later, and still the city doesn't have the Wi-Fi that it needs. Many areas where there is no access or where the connections are poor, the speed is poor, etc. And it affects a lot of schools, needless to say, because sometimes the poor students don't have access to Wi-Fi at home, and many of them depend on access to the internet when they go to school. And if the schools don't have the proper coverage, there we are. Then we have a problem. But this is a positive, actually. If the Wi-Fi, instead of dividing our city between rich and poor, between those who can access and those who can't, then that will be a tremendous advance for us. As Billy Penn says here, it's a reduction in the persistent digital divide. And so the other aspect of this is more tourism for Philadelphia. And that is a very positive thing to have. Because, as I said, the streets that were in such bad shape have been improving recently. So all this is connected. If we're going to help the city, if we're going to have an impact on this, we need to spend that money where it would have the greatest effect. And tourism brings money to the city. Better streets will help us to have a better image. I remember during the administration of Ed Rendell, when Center City became sort of the jewel of the city. Well, we're going to take a brief pause here en Úsala Radio. Les habla Fernando Mendez desde la ciudad del amor fraternal, from the city of brotherly love. Regresamos en un momento.
Once there was a boy who did the same thing again and again. One day, he was told he had autism. He got help and slowly learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
You ever had this food before, or it's like the first time you were here?
A couple times.
Couple times.
Yep.
Yes.
So what do you order right now? Which one?
We got the chicken tikka masala
Yeah, I got the
and the butter.
Oh, so the Indian and Pakistani food is a little bit spicy.
Yeah.
So you tolerate the spice or everything?
I like spice, but we got the mild.
Oh, okay. So it's
But I can do spice.
or in you?
Yeah,
Like spice?
I mean, I can somewhat handle spice. Not too much, so that's why I got the mild.
Señores oyentes de Usa la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Roundtable, desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal, donde antes de la pandemia, la industria de restaurantes había llegado a un punto en que teníamos algunos de los mejores restaurantes del país, yo diría. Y desafortunadamente, COVID hizo un tremendo daño a esta industria, por muchas razones. Por supuesto, cuando empiezan a cerrar negocios en la ciudad, esto tiene un impacto sobre el modo como la gente frecuenta estos restaurantes, sobre todo los grandes restaurantes de precios más altos se vieron inmediatamente afectados cuando se cerraron oficinas y cuando el gobierno obligó a todo el mundo a usar máscaras y esto, a encontrar un modo de sobrevivir. But here's what could happen now. There is something called the Wonton Project. Ellen Yin's pandemic pop-up has lasting power. The Wonton Project is the newest food venture from Ellen Yin from Fork Restaurant, and the first that brings her into the kitchen. Launched when her restaurants were shattered by the pandemic, the mission-driven Ghost Kitchen uses her mother's recipe, and 5% of all proceeds go to organizations that work to stop AAP hate. And that is prejudice against Asian people. The pop-up was so successful that it has expanded with a second location. Hope Cohen joined in to talk about it and told wontons in the latest episode of Crave Philly. So we are about to experience another renaissance of the restaurants that we thought so many of them might not return. In fact, some restaurants are not coming back. Some restaurants that we expected to be open by this time have not opened. Restaurants inside hotels, like the Rittenhouse Hotel, the La Croix restaurant has not opened yet. The rumor is that it might open in March of 2022. So for many people in this city, some of their favorite restaurants disappeared. Some of them might open later on. But there's one aspect of the pandemic and what restaurants did as a result that might last, and that restaurants found a solution with these outdoor areas that now, in some cases, they will be allowed to remain. I am not sure at this point what numbers the government would use, what criteria the city government would use to keep them, to allow them to function with the outdoor areas they have built at great expense, because those are not cheap structures that they have built in many cases. These are structures that will last, that will resist the winter, and that will protect people from harsh environment. And so these are very solid structures. And so many restaurants invested heavily in this. Supposedly, they were allowed to function that way until December of 2021. But I think the whole thing is being extended. And I think some of these restaurants are being encouraged to remain open with those outdoor areas. So it's not all bad news for our city. But one thing that is still suffering is the labor force. Many restaurants are struggling to function because they don't have enough waiters and waitresses. They don't have help in the kitchen. They don't have chefs. And so that has made it difficult for many restaurants to come back, to restart, now that the COVID is to some extent under control. It is expected that there might be another wave because of Delta, but for the most part, we feel that the city has done very well with the struggle against COVID. Vaccinations are very high in our city, and the restaurants have taken steps to still remain safe areas. There's still many of them are asking that you provide proof of vaccination. Many of them are asking that you wear a mask as you walk inside the establishment. So those things will help us to survive. But again, the economy is one of those things. The economy reacts in sort of unexpected ways. The market, for instance, the Wall Street market, has not responded in a normal way to the crisis. I mean, at the height of the pandemic, the market was thriving, and it seems to me that there are other factors that in our economy that we must deal with. Which brings me to another point, because everything is sort of connected with the economy. Immigration. One of the reasons in the Southwest, California and Texas and Arizona, many businesses are suffering for lack of labor. They don't have enough people to work the land. enough people to provide services. And that also has been felt on the East Coast, and from New York to Boston to Washington. There are many restaurants that have not been able to be staffed properly because they don't have people. There are not enough qualified chefs, and there are not enough people who want to work for the low wages that restaurants pay usually. Tips are not necessarily the way to go. In Europe, one of the surprises when you go to some European countries is that you're not allowed to tip because the staff is professional. The waiters, the people who are serving you are professionals who are properly paid. Therefore, they don't depend on the mood of the customers. Well, not they will give them a proper tip. You're still allowed, if you wish, in some places, to add to the bill and say this is extra, but in general, you're not expected to. So we're far from there. In this country, tipping is still a great part of how restaurant people are paid. In fact, the service industry in hotels and other places depends on your generosity as they provide you with the necessary services. Well, another thing in our city of brotherly love. Recently, we have been paying attention to our football team, the Eagles. And there's a young quarterback, Mr. Hertz, and he did very well recently in one of the games we watched. And so one of the things that help the spirit of a city is when you have winning teams. Sports are a very big part of our daily life. In fact, for many people, depression comes in when the local teams fail to perform properly. So we're happy to celebrate Eagles' victories. We like the fact that they won a Super Bowl a while ago, but we would like to see it again. Now that seems like a distant memory when they won the last Super Bowl. Likewise, the other teams, we will expect to see improvement in the basketball team, in the Sixers, in Flyers. And, well, the Phillies have always struggled, but there's always, with sports teams, there's always next year. We will see what happens with the Philadelphia Eagles because they're a young team. Another team that has done very well, to the surprise of many, is our local soccer team, the Union. So we expect we'll be following them, the Union and the other teams, because they will help us to be more optimistic about the future of our city. Bueno, muchas gracias por su sintonía en el día de hoy. Se despide Fernando Mendez aquí en la Mesa Redonda. Danny Ramos and Pastor Phil controlaron la máquina digital. Hasta la próxima. Greetings from the city of brotherly love. I am Fernando Mendez, host of the Roundtable. We invite you to listen to our discussion of the themes of the day when we bring you regional, national, and international news.